Welcome to Positive Talk with Kevin McDonald. Hey, that's me. Hi, and welcome to Positive Talk. Our show features the best positive stories and people from around the globe as we endeavor to answer the universal question of why am I here and what is my purpose? Understanding that can change everything, and knowing your greatness is fundamental to living your best life. So join us right now as together we work to create the adventure of our lifetime. And welcome to the show, everybody. I'm so glad you're here, and I'm so glad Michelle's here, and we've got a great guest for you today, and we're going to talk about one of my favorite topics in the world, and that is history, about how things were and how they led us to be where we are today in a lot of cases. So given that, Rochelle, would you like to introduce our guest today?
I would love to. We have Robin Bernstein here with us. She wrote the book called The Freeman's Challenge. She's going to be here to tell us a little bit about and that journey. So thank you for being here, Robin. And how are you doing?
Thanks so much for having me. I'm doing great.
Great.
And Freeman's Challenge is a new book that is just coming out. Is it out now, or is it being birthed as we speak?
It is out now. Freeman's Challenge, The Murder That Shook America's Original Prison for Profit, is out and available.
Very good.
Can you, I was reading the bio of the book, and you're going back in time. I had no idea that this story takes place in I believe it's pre-Civil War times. Is that true?
That's right. And that's really important because the book is in part about the legacy of slavery. And in the North, slavery ended before it ended in the South. It ended before the Civil War, but not that long before the Civil War. So it's actually really important that this story, which is very much about the legacy of slavery, takes place before the Civil War in the North of the United States.
Well, let me see if for those of you who may be a little younger, or when it was time to take history, U.S. history, you were absent. Let me explain what Robin just said, and then I'll ask her to verify whether or not I studied history correctly when I was in school. At one time, slavery was United States all over the place. But because the North was predominantly a manufacturing economy, and the South was more of a plantation economy, the use of slavery in the North had far less value than it did in the South because of the number of humans that it took to run a plantation. Have I got that even close to being right, Robin?
Certainly one legitimate way to look at it. It's very complicated why slavery becomes a dominant economic force in one place and not another place, or more so in one place and less so in another place. So for any historical phenomenon that's that complicated, of course, there are going to be people who disagree. But what you just said is a legitimate, reasonable interpretation for sure.
Because Rochelle, we have to be careful here because Robin has actually got an education, and I believe she.
Yeah.
Are you still at Harvard?
I am. I'm a professor at Harvard, but I'm very nice, so you don't have to be worried at all.
Well, it's really is important because talking to somebody from Harvard, that what got you into, now you're a professor, what do you teach in what are you a professor of?
I'm a professor of U.S. history. I basically teach U.S. cultural history. And what that means is I'm interested in the stories that Americans tell about themselves to themselves, how we're all telling ourselves stories about who we are, what America is, why it matters. And these stories have an enormous impact on how we think about ourselves, but also on what we do. The stories we tell about ourselves have a huge impact on the course of American history. So that's basically what I study.
Very nice.
And it's really is interesting because, and you can help me here, I'm not 100% sure that everything we has been told is exactly historically accurate. Would I be historically correct in my analysis?
Definitely would be correct. Yes, that is absolutely right.
I got the biggest kick out of it. We were talking to somebody about the Revolutionary War period and when slavery became a thing because they came from Haiti to begin with, and they also came in the South, and then and that we are a lot more multicultural than we think we is, because when you are nowadays even claimed to have a white heritage, they're probably somewhere in the past. I want to reference Thomas Jefferson. There's somebody in the past that may not have been of the same color and may have been a slave, or there's a lot of that kind of stuff that we don't want to recognize. Is that kind of true?
Yeah.
Sure. There are a lot of hidden stories in history, and that was one of the reasons that I wanted to write Freeman's Challenge. It was a story that I had never heard anything about. So the book is about a teenager, a Black and Native American teenager named William Freeman, who, in the wake of slavery in New York State, he challenged the system that came about to replace slavery. And the system that came about to replace slavery was profit-driven prisons. So profit-driven prisons arose in the North, not the South. A lot of people think they arose in the South, but that's not true. They arose in the North long before the Civil War, replacing the slavery system in New York State. And William Freeman was this teenager who rose up against the system and challenged this system, which was then new. This was in the 1840s. He challenged this huge new economic system. And that's what my book is about. And this is a story that hasn't been told ever. And so I thought, when I found this story, I thought, this is an incredible story and I need to tell it. I need to write a book about William Freeman.
Exactly. So, Rochelle, did you have a thought? Any
Yes.
questions?
Well, it's crazy because as I've been kind of just sitting here and observing and listening to you guys along the way, I've had questions and then somehow they got answered, because I was wondering how, like, what made you be like, you know what, this is a phenomenon I'm going to write about. And it's also something I think of now. It's kind of something that could be a present day thing that might be able to help us, is for us to challenge ourselves, to challenge and question things. Why are the things the way they are? To have a deeper understanding. I feel like a lot of people are so separated by things that they don't understand. And I love how you share a story of someone who was like, hey, I have a different view on this. Please hear me out and see what I'm saying, because it wasn't just about him and doing what he did, but also for the people in the prison, right?
Yeah, that's right. So William Freeman has been dismissed for almost 200 years as a quote unquote lunatic. So William Freeman, when he was 15 years old, he was convicted of a horse theft. He insisted that he was innocent of the horse theft. He always insisted on that, but it didn't matter. There was no hard evidence against him, but it didn't matter. He was tried, he was convicted, and he was sentenced to 5 years hard labor in the Auburn State Prison, which was the original prison that invented the idea that a prison could exist mainly for profit. So there were these factories built into the prison, and he was forced to work in those factories along with every other prisoner there. And he was furious. He had always been free. His father had been enslaved, but had become free. His mother had always been free. And what he believed was that he deserved to be paid for his work. And so he demanded wages, and he was dismissed as a lunatic for demanding to be compensated for his labor. So when I first found this story, I was intrigued and I kept going deeper and deeper. And as I researched more and more, I started to realize this is a very rational claim. The idea that a person deserves to be paid for their labor, that doesn't sound crazy at all. And the fact that other people were dismissing him as crazy, I thought, well, they have something to gain. by making that claim. And what I learned as I dug deeper and deeper into the story was that a lot of people who were calling him crazy actually had their own economic investments in the prison. They had their own economic motivations for dismissing this person as crazy. So I was just hooked. I mean, I was hooked on the story. I was hooked on how William Freeman was so brave and challenged the whole system. And I was also hooked on the way that William Freeman had his own really strong internal moral compass. And his perspective was that he was a citizen, he was not an enslaved person, and he deserved to be paid for his work. And I thought that is a point that is really worth making in the world. It was worth making in 1840 when he made it, and it's worth making today.
Well, and I think about it on his side and his end of it, he did so much more than just talk about that, because he went there in the first place for something he did not do, was accused, was claimed, was sentenced. Now he's there. That's his already supposed to be his punishment. So on top of that, you want what more from me with and I see the other side of it too, is like, okay, so you put me in prison for this long, I get out, and what do I have? Nothing.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's the way that they probably like to set it up, because it was easier. They had more gains from that. But I didn't ever think of them, other people in prison, having to do with knowing what was going on and benefiting from it. Kevin, don't you think that's crazy? Am I the only
Well,
one?
a couple things. First of all, Robin, he was convicted of being a horse thief.
That's correct.
Don't they know where the horse was?
The horse was recovered. But yeah, there was no hard evidence against him, and he was accused by this other person in town who probably was the person who actually stole the horse.
So wait a minute. So you're telling me that a guy said, no, I didn't steal that horse, even though it's in my barn, I didn't steal it. That guy took it and he put it there just to frame me. No,
It's actually a little bit more complicated than that. So when the horse was found, it was found with William Freeman, and that was considered evidence toward his conviction. But what William Freeman said very reasonably, and it was probably true, was that William Freeman, he was a kid, he was 15 years old. And the person who probably actually stole the horse was an adult. He was the father of William Freeman's friend. And what William Freeman claimed, and was probably true, was that his friend's father told him to run an errand with the horse. And William Freeman said, okay. And, he ran an errand for this adult and then got caught with the horse. And that was William Freeman's story. And there's a lot of evidence to suggest that it was probably true.
Well, and I had always been told that maybe it was in the West that they hung horse thieves, but the other thing, Robin, that I was struck, number one, that people want to be paid for their labor. What a unique concept. And number two, what would happen if you ran out of people to work in the factory run by the jail? Did you then manufacture people to get convicted of stuff so that you had a labor force?
Yeah, that's a great question. So right now, today, people in prison constitute a major labor force in the United States. And so what a lot of people think is that when you mix a profit motive with incarceration, what you're basically doing is you're creating a motive for more incarceration. You're creating an economic motive for more people to be sent to prisons and jails. And so that's a perspective that's really familiar today, and it was really familiar back in William Freeman's day.
Well, and you've heard of the phrase that you're going to go to jail and then you're going to make license plates. But that is one of the things that they do today, I think, still.
Absolutely. And actually, I'm so glad you brought that up because, okay, you're not going to believe this. The Auburn prison which is a prison in New York State, which invented the whole idea that a prison can and should be a profit-driven enterprise, that a prison should basically be run like a business. Auburn invented that. Now, the Auburn prison still exists. It is still operating. It is the oldest continually operating maximum security prison in the United States. And guess what they manufacture there today? Can you guess?
License plates.
Absolutely. Not only do they manufacture license plates, they manufacture every single license plate that is made in New York State. So if you have ever seen a car with New York State license plates, if you've ever owned a car with New York State license plates, those individual plates were literally made by a man, and they are all men, who was literally walking in William Freeman's footsteps.
That's just amazing.
And they don't get paid for this.
They get paid. They do get paid today. In William Freeman's day, they got paid nothing. Today, they get paid 65 cents an hour, which I don't need to tell you is not much. And it's one of the big differences between, well, I recently was very, very fortunate to be able to go to the Auburn prison. My press, the University of Chicago Press, was very generous and donated 70 copies of Freeman's Challenge to people who are incarcerated in the Auburn prison today. And so they received these copies of the book, and then I was able to go and talk to them. And it was an amazing experience. And I talked to them for a while about William Freeman. They had gotten the books 3 days earlier, and some of them had already read the book cover to cover. And of course, some of them hadn't yet. And so I talked to them for about half an hour about William Freeman. And then I said, I'm really curious to know what in William Freeman's experience resonates for you and what doesn't. And what I really expected them to say was that the difference of being paid mattered, because William Freeman was paid nothing, and that's what he was so angry about. He wanted to be paid something. He didn't want to get rich. He just wanted to be paid for his work. And today, the incarcerated workers at Auburn are paid for their work. Low wages, but they are paid. And so I kind of thought they would say, oh, that's a really big difference. But they didn't say that at all. Instead, what they said was that the biggest difference they saw between William Freeman's experience and their own was the commissary. The commissary didn't exist in William Freeman's day, so there was nothing to spend money on. But today, if you're incarcerated in New York State, you need to actually spend money in the prison in order to get certain kinds of necessities to keep your body healthy. So things like brand name toothpaste, certain kinds of soap, underwear. If you want these things that aren't, that have any quality at all, you have to buy them in the commissary. So on the one hand, they're paid. On the other hand, they have these things that they must spend their money on. So that's a real continuity between the 1840s and today.
So basically, it was a, well, we need to take a break. And when we come back, we're going to talk more about this, because you know, the what's going on in our prison systems today. And by the way, and I'm going to ask Robin Bernstein this when we come back. Per capita, we incarcerate more people than anybody else in the world, I do believe. And I'm going to have her confirm that. But in the meantime, we're going to listen to Ophir Adar, and we're going to talk about real estate. So we're going to do that right now.
You became a real estate agent for freedom, success, and real momentum. So why are you still stuck waiting for closings to save you? I'm Ophir Adar, founder of Real Momentum, and I help agents like you become seven-figure earners. My first client that I coached, brand new agent, made $250,000 back in 2006. What's the secret? You feed your white wolf. That's the part of you that's bold and unstoppable and a closer and able to build rapport quickly. So click Get Listings at Real Momentum and let's unleash your real estate potential.
And Welcome back to Positive Talk with Kevin McDonald and Rochelle. She's here. She's right there. And we're talking with Robin Bernstein, and she's written the book, Freeman's Challenge. You know, I got to tell you, Robin, I love history and learning about things that nobody wants to talk about, things that are inconvenient. That what do you mean they're not getting paid? What do you mean they're getting paid 65 cents, but they got to buy their own damn underwear? Are you serious? And stuff like that. It really is important work that you're doing, and I really appreciate. What was it like for you when you ran across this story of Mr. Freeman, and you looked around and the story wasn't out there? What was that like?
It was amazing. It was really amazing. So once I started learning about William Freeman, I just could not put the story down. And I wanted to write the book in a way that the reader would not be able to put the book down. So one thing I should say is that every single word in the book is true, but I wrote it like a novel. I wanted to write it in such a way that people would care about William Freeman as much as I did. So I just found the story so fascinating, the way that he had been incarcerated and the way that it told us a different story about the origins of prison for profit, but also his courage and the way he stood up to this system and the way he was dismissed, the way he was dismissed as a quote unquote lunatic, when really what he had to say was absolutely worth listening to. So it was an amazing experience for me to recover this story. Part of what made it really difficult to recover was that William Freeman did not write. So he never wrote his own story, and he also never dictated his own story, unlike people like Harriet Tubman, for example, who was actually connected to William Freeman's story in a really deep way, and I'd love to talk about that. Harriet Tubman is actually really important in this book. So Harriet Tubman is somebody who dictated her own story, but William Freeman never did. So how do you recover the experiences of a person, a Black person, a Native American person who did not write his own story? And what I had to do, of course, was go to the records of other people who knew him, who said what he said. There was a murder, but when I say that, I'm not giving anything away. It's right in the title of the book. The title of the book is Freeman's Challenge, The Murder That Shook America's Original Prison for Profit. So there was a murder and there was a trial. And what you learn in the first couple pages of the book, so again, this is not a spoiler, is that William Freeman does commit a murder. He goes into prison for a horse theft that he probably did not commit, but then later on, he does in fact commit a murder, and he goes to trial. And Freeman did not testify at his own trial, but many people who knew him did. And these were some people who were aiming to end his life, ending to send him to the gallows. But other people who testified in the trial were people who loved him very much. His mother testified. His brother-in-law testified, his sister-in-law testified. These were people who cared about him tremendously. And so I was able to recover some of William Freeman's perspective through the voices of people who talked about him, especially people who talked about him from a perspective of love.
Well, you know, Rochelle, I got to tell you, if I was a 15-year-old boy, and I was falsely accused of horse thievery, and then everybody said, no, he did it because he's a 15-year-old African-American, Native American person, and we can't trust him. And then he goes to prison, and then he works in a factory and doesn't get paid a damn dime. I think I would be a little bit of a lunatic, too. How about you?
Yeah, no, and I'm surprised they only killed one person. I mean, at that point, it's like, it's free range. Like, I'm already here. I'm already going to deal with it. Might as well get some of the bad ones out, which is horrible to think about. But I love how you talk about I love how you name it a challenge, because the whole time he chose, how am I going to choose to get through this? How am I going to how am I going to use my words? How am I going to hold my body language? How am I going to control my emotions? You want to know how I'd be? Like, probably a ravage animal. They probably take me out of the prison and put me in a psychiatric hospital because I would have been to that point. But it goes to show that even back then, people still had the courage to stand up and say, hey, hear me, listen to me, do this, like somebody do something. I'm here to speak for us all. And we come to this day and age, and that same thing happens. We have people that are standing up trying to show us, listen, it's like, don't listen to them. They're crazy. And I had an experience I'd love to tell you about, Robin, because I just want your perspective. You probably got a lot of similar things reading about him, wondering, okay, well, was he kind of just a little far off his rocker? Are there some things that can be questioned? Or was he just driven to that point and had no other choice, but we did a yard sale out in Monte Vista. For our viewers, they know that I go to Colorado to visit my family, and it's like going back in time. Well, there's this lady there, and she's a little older, and she's pushing around this miniature cart. I'm talking like it's maybe this wide, and it's just got this huge basket in it, and it's got wheels. And she came back and forth multiple times. And at one point we told her, just give us $1. You can have anything you want. Like, take it all if you want to. And she started talking to my mom about all these things she's experienced in the past with like aliens and the military and all these things, right? You'd think this lady is out of her mind. She's on something. But my mom said I stood there for a moment and tried to grasp where she was coming from. And there was things she said that there is history proof about. And yes, you'd see her, you'd think, oh, she's just out of her mind, right? Like, just let her be. But there's probably so much you could learn from somebody like that. And did that change your perspective on how you maybe saw people or how you learned things from others?
Well, one of the things about William Freeman is that while he was incarcerated in the Auburn State Prison,
Mhm.
he tried to refuse to work. He was really clear from day one that he did not want to work for no pay, and he tried to refuse. And as you might imagine, there was terrible retribution. And at one point, a guard beat him so badly that he suffered a traumatic brain injury. His skull was broken. And as a result of this beating, he also became deaf, as well as having the brain injury. He became almost entirely deaf. So William Freeman was a brain injured person, and that's true. And one thing that I write about in Freeman's Challenge is that he did have certain impairments as a direct result of this horrible beating. And of course, during his lifetime, this beating and the fact that he did have certain impairments was used to dismiss everything he said. And my perspective was, it is totally possible to be a brain injured person and still make a rational moral argument. It is totally possible to be a person with certain mental impairments, a person with some mental health problems, and still make a rational and important moral claim. So that was one of the points that I really wanted to communicate in Freeman's Challenge, that somebody can have a mental health problem, somebody can have a mental impairment, and they can still have something extremely important to say.
It's amazing to me that stories like this are not more in the public domain and are not out there, because the interesting thing about that is it happens all the time. It's still happening today, where people are getting. I want to ask you about this, Robin, because you've done history. You're a professor at Harvard, and you're a very It's just amazing to me when you stop and look at what has gone on in historical things that either get buried, or they're misrepresented, and it's not true, but it affects people greatly. As an example, in today's world, William Freeman being a 15-year-old boy going into a man's prison, that would not happen. And I'm sure that it wasn't all cupcakes and roses for him when he was behind bars with a bunch of people and criminals that were, 10, 15, 20 years older than him. And the abuse that he went through. And I'll bet you the guy, the guard who beat him never was brought up on charges, and it never was a big deal. And he probably didn't even get the care that he needed because he had a cracked skull.
Oh, and actually, I did find out what happened to the person who beat him, and it's in the epilogue of the book. And it's absolutely astounding. When I found out what actually happened to this person, I almost fell down in astonishment. So if you want to find out what happened to the man who gave William Freeman a traumatic brain injury and beat him so badly that William Freeman lost his hearing, if you want to find out, it's in the epilogue to Freeman's Challenge.
And
Dang
you
it.
can. She's not gonna say. And,
I have so many books to read, but I'm adding it to the list, Robin. I promise.
Thank
and
you.
we need to take a break, and we are going to return in just after our halftime break, and more with Robin Bernstein and Freeman's Challenge. I'm telling you, I'm smitten by this book. I'm going to have to go and read it because it is so much more than him. It is more along the lines of what humans do to other humans that is so immoral, but we bury it, and people don't even, oh no, he deserved everything he got as a 15-year-old boy. We'll be right back. This is Positive Talk.
You're listening to Brushwood Media Network, the best in syndicated talk, news, and entertainment shows.
Are you looking for a powerful way to grow your brand while making a real difference? Well, Positive Talk is the perfect platform to align your message with inspiration, hope, and meaningful conversations. By sponsoring Positive Talk, your brand will reach an engaged audience that values positivity and connection. People who want to support companies that share their values. Take this opportunity to showcase your business in a space that uplifts, inspires, and creates lasting impact. Don't wait. Email me, Kevin@kmmedia.pro today to learn how you can partner with us and spread positivity while growing your brand. And welcome back to Positive Talk with Kevin McDonald and Burchelle. And by the way, Burchelle, that's a commercial that our team, those people who work with us, they did that. Yep. I couldn't do it myself, but they did it. And if you ever have that desire that you want something great to put out into the world, we can help you do that. But besides the point, we're talking with Robin Bernstein, and she's a professor at Harvard. She's a history I'll bet you that when you are in front of the class and when you are working, that you hold people's attention and their undivided attention because of all the unique things that you are able to talk about what happened, what really is going on, and what has happened in our history in real time.
I hope so. I certainly, try to keep the students awake.
Rochelle, go ahead. I know you got questions.
Yeah, I'm wondering now that Kevin mentioned that is like your teaching. Did learning any of these stories, or, I mean, I'm guessing, but is there something specific that maybe has to do with the Freeman's Challenge or not that shifted the way you decided to teach? And then I also want to talk about, there's no way I'm forgetting this. Don't be mad. She's involved in Freeman's Challenge.
The lady that you were
that told her story. It's on the tip of my tongue. She told her own story. You said she's involved.
Harriet
Tubman. Yes. Yes. So,
yeah, absolutely.
So let's just let you choose. Would you like to talk about your teaching, or do you want to get into a little bit touching Harriet Tubman, because I am curious about
Harriet. Let's talk about Harriet.
I would much rather talk about Harriet Tubman. Harriet Tubman is much more interesting than me, let me tell you.
Oh, that's not true. But she is.
Harriet,
go ahead.
Well, Harriet Tubman is an American hero. I certainly do not think of myself as an American hero. No, nowhere close. So Harriet Tubman, of course, was known as Moses. She was an enslaved woman who liberated herself and then liberated many, many people in her family. By the end of her life, liberated more than 70 people from slavery. And Harriet Tubman came through Auburn. So Auburn is in central New York State. And the Underground Railroad, of which Harriet Tubman was a major force, came through Auburn. It had many routes between the South and Canada, but some of the routes came through Auburn. So Harriet Tubman was going through Auburn starting probably in about the 1840s into the early 1850s. And at a certain point, she actually bought property there. She bought property in Auburn and she settled there. So she settled there starting in 1857, and she chose to live in Auburn for the second half of her life. She lived there until she passed away in 1913. So this is hugely important, in part because Harriet Tubman is this amazing person, and she worshiped at the AME Zion Church where William Freeman's family worshiped. And her Underground Railroad activity actually involved many members of William Freeman's family. Her brother was collaborating with William Freeman's first cousin to help liberate people from slavery. And meanwhile, she was worshiping at the same church as William Freeman's family, and she knew them. So she was somebody who was a member of the community. But one of the really amazing things that nobody has ever talked about is that Harriet Tubman, the great emancipator, who could have lived in many, many different places, chose to spend the second half of her life living 2 miles away from the original prison for profit. She chose to live in the shadow of this new form of unslavery, of this new form of unfreedom, rather, after she had spent her entire life fighting for freedom. And while she was still fighting for freedom, she chose to live in the shadow of this newly invented form of unfreedom. Now, what does that mean? How do we grapple with that? And my own answer to that is that it's complicated. And all of our lives have a lot of contradictions. So in many, many ways, Harriet Tubman was a completely astonishing and extraordinary individual. But then, of course, in other ways, she was completely ordinary, because everybody in the entire world is extraordinary in some ways and ordinary in other ways. Harriet Tubman was much more extraordinary than most people, but she also had a part of her that was ordinary. And one way that she was ordinary was she got absorbed into an economic system of profit-driven incarceration. This profit-driven incarceration was actually making the entire town wealthy. It was affecting everybody. Auburn became a kind of company town where everybody was economically entangled with the prison in one way or another. And Harriet Tubman was economically entangled with the prison simply because she was a human being in Auburn, and everybody was entangled with the prison. So one thing I show in the book is how Harriet Tubman's economic well-being was directly tied to the prison. And I document this. I show people who funded her book, for example, were making their money off of the prison. The land that she bought was originally owned by this man named Elijah Miller, who was one of the founders of the Auburn State Prison and got rich off of it. So he owned the land that she eventually bought, and that land was paid for with prison money. So this is a way in which Harriet Tubman was totally entangled with prison for profit. And actually, we all are. You know, I grew up in New York City, and my parents drove a car, and that car had license plates on it. And those license plates were made in the Auburn prison. I am entangled with specifically the Auburn prison. Another really good example is that I went to public school. I went to public school for first grade through 12th grade. And one thing I know now that I didn't know then was that pretty much all the furniture in the schools that I went to, it was made in prisons. I was sitting on chairs that were made in prisons by prison workers who were earning 65 cents an hour or less. I am entangled with the system of profit-driven incarceration. We all are. And that's something that connects me to Harriet Tubman. We were both entangled in this system, despite our goals, despite our morals, despite our stated politics, we're entangled.
Mm.
You know, and I gotta ask you, because there are people that are going, I didn't know they had subways back then. The Underground Railroad was not a subway, ladies and gentlemen. It was, would you like to explain, because you'll do a much better job than I will, what the Underground Railroad was and the impact it had on so many people?
Absolutely. So the Underground Railroad was an informal network of people and places that helped enslaved people free themselves. So it was a system that was not orderly. I think when people hear the phrase Underground Railroad, they picture something with not even if they understand that it's not literally a railroad, they picture something with tracks. They picture something with a schedule. They picture something that's very well organized. And it wasn't that. It was an informal network of politically engaged people helping enslaved people to free themselves. And the Underground Railroad involved a lot of people who were African American. It involved a lot of people who were white. And these people helped enslaved people go from basically one safer location. I won't say safe, but one safer location to another. So people came up through Philadelphia, for example, and then went north toward New York, toward Massachusetts, toward all kinds of other places, and eventually to Canada. So this is what the Underground Railroad was. Auburn was really involved with the Underground Railroad, and Harriet Tubman was a major force, and a lot of members of William Freeman's family were involved with the Underground Railroad. They were heroes.
And one other thing that I have to mention, because it's amazing how things changed in that time, because there was an absolution, or what do you call it? They were trying to free people from slavery. Absolution? No, abolitionist. Abolition. There was a guy, his name was John, I forget his last name, and he was in Missouri. And he was an absolute abolitionist, and he was trying to free slaves. And in those days, they hung him for it. Do you remember his name?
John Brown, I think you're talking about.
That's right, John Brown. And because I remember the song, John Brown's body lies a moldering in the grave. Anyway, but it was amazing that even, what is that, 150 years, no, 175 years ago, that folks like that were then vilified for their, now he may have done some things that of a violent nature that I don't know, but we as a country, we're still wallowing in some of that stuff that we had back then. And we're not through it yet, at least in my opinion. What do you think?
Well, this is a really complicated thing. And, I try never to underplay the fact that William Freeman did commit violence. It was really important to me to put the word murder in the title of the book, because I didn't want it to sneak up on anybody. I don't like books that have a gotcha. I like books that hold moral complexity. So in William Freeman's case, he was a person who had terrible violence done against him. And he was a person who committed a murder. And both of those things are true. Just like it can be true that he had a mental impairment and he had a really important moral claim. Again, both of these things can be true at the same time. So this is a book with moral complexity, and that was one of the things that was really important to me, to hold that complexity in this book.
History ain't black, nor is it white, and nor is it easy. There's a lot of, Rochelle, isn't it? Do you like doing shows like this? I love them because she is so talented, and we learn so much.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's good for us to learn, especially like we talk about this being so long ago and how it still affects us now, and seeing that. And as a younger person, these things are important for us to understand because it shapes our beliefs, and our beliefs control who we are and how we live our life. And I'd have to say, Robin, I know we need to take a quick break, but I want to talk about your perspective on the today's day knowledge of history, because I have to admit that there's so many times I was that kid that was troubled either getting in conversations or arguments with other kids, or directly trying to fight with the teacher, because for one, they're teaching me something I don't understand, and I'm learning it out of a book. And I think that the way you teach history shapes also the way somebody learns it, which is what they choose to believe. And so if it's not taught correctly, and whoever's doing it doesn't have the passion or the facts behind it, it's easy for them to misinterpret it and pass it along. So we'll take a quick break with me and Kevin here, and Robert Bernstein. Go and visit her book, Freeman's Challenge. Look it up. Go read it. I'm going to have to, but it's going to be a while, I'll admit to you, because I really want to know some of the things you won't spoil. But when we come back, I want to talk about your perception on today's history and talk.
And your website, if people want to go reference that, and your cute little dog that's right behind you, and the little dog too. What's your website?
I'm sorry?
What's your website that the people can
Oh,
reference?
my website is robinbernsteinphd.com. ROBINBERNSTEINPHD.com.
Very good.
And that's just perfect. We'll be back in 30 seconds. Don't anybody go anywhere.
When the game is on the line, championship teams know the game plan. They communicate and work together to win. We all need a game plan to protect ourselves online. Talk to family and friends so they know how to stay safe too. Create strong passwords, turn on multi-factor authentication, update software, and recognize and report phishing, because online safety is not something you want to fumble. Get more game-winning tips at CISA.gov/secure our world. Then share them with family and friends.
And welcome back to Positive Talk with Rochelle. She's over there. That's her right there. And my name is Kevin McDonald, and Robin Bernstein is with us. And go ahead, Rochelle. You were going to ask her. You asked her a question that I've totally forgot what it was. Go ahead, ask it again.
Just your perspective on the way history is taught today, and maybe some things that we can take a look at and stand up for, to make sure we're actually learning these things valid and not having a misinterpreted belief.
Yeah. Well, I think one thing that's really important about history is to center the lives and voices and experiences of people of color. So the way that I was taught history, it was white history. Nobody ever called it that, but that's absolutely what it was. I did not learn about people of color. I did not learn about Black people. I did not learn about Native American people. And it was a very distorted view of history that I received. And I really had to go out of my way to educate myself. And, once I got to college, then I had a lot more options. But the history education that I received was in some ways very good, but in a lot of ways it was deeply skewed. And I didn't even truly comprehend how biased the history I was receiving was until I really got to college and I started to get a wider view. So I think one thing that's really important is, especially in American history should reflect Americans. American history should encompass the full complexity of this beautiful country, this amazing citizenry that we have. Americans are absolutely amazing people. My PhD is in American Studies. I truly love this country. And I truly get excited about the people and the ideas in this country. And for me, that means embracing the diversity and the complexity and the variation of those people. So I would say any history that is going to be honest is going to incorporate and account for people of color. It's going to account for Black people. It's going to account for the history of slavery. This is all really important to all of us if we're going to actually understand who we are, where we came from, and where we want to go.
Exactly.
Is it, Robin, and I hesitate to even ask this, but I'm going to anyway, because I've been told on the news and some other places that and I guess they call it wokeism or something along those lines. I don't even know what that means, quite frankly. But I heard somebody say, well, you know, when we start talking about slavery and what the Black experience was in the United States, and we talk about it too much, it makes the white kids feel bad. I don't know that that's true or whether that should be something that we should allow because it's history and it really happened. Should we take an unvarnished look at ourselves and how things really happened? I'll give you another example is the Native American experience through the 1800s and what they had to go through and the number of treaties that were signed and then ignored and all that kind of isn't that important things for us to know going forward so we don't repeat them?
Yeah, absolutely. It's crucial to know reality. What I think is important is reality. Let's deal with reality and let's have some faith in children, including white children, that when ideas are presented to them in an age-appropriate way, they can do something really good with that. So I'll give you an example of how I got interested in African American history. I am not African American, I'm a white person. And the way that I got interested in this subject matter as a child was, to be totally honest, through the TV show Roots.
Yes.
Roots aired when I was about 8 years old, and I watched it. And my parents framed it for me in a way that was incredibly smart. My parents encouraged my brother and me to watch all of Roots. And I had the kind of parents who normally don't let their kids watch a lot of TV. So it made a real impression on me that my parents wanted me to watch this mini series. And the way my parents framed it to me and my brother was that Roots was American history. And all of it was American history, and we were Americans. So I understood perfectly well that this was not my family's history, this was not my racial history, but it was American history, all of it. The Black people's stories, the white people's stories, all of it was American history, and I was an American. The good parts of Roots, the disturbing parts of Roots, the inspiring parts of Roots, the violent parts of Roots, all of that was American history, and I was an American, and therefore this history mattered to me. So this is what my parents taught me at this moment when I was just a little kid. And to be honest, that is what I still believe. That is totally what I still believe. And so I watched Roots, and it upset me. It really upset me. And in particular, just the idea of what slavery was disturbed the heck out of me. The idea, the idea that I found so disturbing was this idea that a human could be, quote, owned by another human, or that one human could own another. I found that idea tremendously disturbing. And part of the reason I found it so disturbing was that I couldn't make it make sense. It just didn't make any sense to me. How could that be true? It didn't make any sense. And that discomfort, I was a little white kid who was uncomfortable. But rather than crumbling and falling apart and having that damage me in some way, instead spurred me to learn more and to think. And of course, now what I understand as an adult is that the reason that it didn't make any sense to me when I was a child is that, in fact, slavery does not make any sense, because, in fact, one human cannot own or be owned by another human. That is not possible. And so that core fact that was so disturbing to me as a child, and frankly is still very disturbing to me now, I was right to be disturbed. The fact that I was disturbed was part of my learning, and I wasn't damaged by that. I benefited from that.
Mm.
Exactly, especially the story of Kunte Kinte.
Yep. Well, and
Who
I think it's
ended
so
up
important to involve your kids, because then it teaches them, hey, that was a good point you just made, Robin. It's just like this light bulb went off, because it also teaches you that something of you that's a part of your past, you also don't have to feel guilt for, and you do not have to crumble.
Yeah,
We our
exactly.
history did this, you as a person did this, you get to choose what you make of it now.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. We get to choose what we make of it. We don't choose our history. And that's part of the problem of censoring history, is that it's an attempt to choose our history. We can't choose our history. Our history, all of us as Americans, all of us have a history that is beautiful and inspiring and disturbing and violent. All of us have that legacy. What we do with it is our choice. But shutting it up, turning away, that's always the wrong answer.
Yep.
because it might make somebody feel a little uncomfortable that their ancestors did this or did that. Well, we did. We did all of it. All of us did. And our ancestors did. And so I think coming to terms with it is a really good idea. And I'm glad you wrote the book. Talk about Freeman's Challenge again.
Sure. Well, Freeman's Challenge, the murder that shook America's original prison for profit, tells the heroic story of a teenager who was falsely accused of horse theft and incarcerated in America's original prison for profit. Every word of the book is true, but it reads like a novel. It takes you into William Freeman's experience in America's original prison for profit, and it takes you deep into his resistance to it, the way he challenged this enormous economic force, and he took it on. And Freeman's Challenge tells the story of that action.
And not only that, Robin's got a couple of more books. And if you go to her website, which is robinbernsteinphd.com, you'll find out about those books as well. You are sensational. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. This has been wonderful.
And Rochelle, anything that you would like to ask before? We've got about a minute and a half. Anything that you'd like to
I'd
ask?
just like to know, Robin, what thought you'd like to leave us and our audience with before we head on out of here?
I would say don't be afraid of history. Don't be afraid to learn about history. If you learn something that is upsetting, that can be your direction for the future. If something that you learn about the past is upsetting to you, that can be your inspiration to create a different future. Learn about history, because it's a way of learning about the future that you can choose, the future that you can help create.
And a very wise man once said, those that refuse to look at history are doomed to repeat it. Let's not repeat the negative parts. Let's all repeat the good parts. Robin, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks, Robin.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Positive Talk with Kevin McDonald. Our purpose is to provide everyone with a positive, entertaining, and educational experience. I would love your feedback and comments about the show, including possible topics and great guest suggestions. Please email me at kevin@kmmedia.pro. And remember, be kind to one another, because each other's all we've got. That's Kevin